Thank you very much for all these kind words, and thank you for being here tonight. It's a great pleasure for me to be in Portland. I saw the snow disappearing as I was going south. I said, that's great. I was ready to go all the way to Florida, but I stopped here. On the little rain, so it took me 6 hours, but it's a great pleasure to be here and to talk about responsible seafood farming. And the way we think we can do it is by combining. So it's a seafood recipe. We can combine fish, seaweeds, and invertebrate together. And that's what we call integrated multi-trophic aquaculture. And you can see we can combine salmon, we can combine mussels, and we can combine seaweeds. And all that is very good for your stomach, but it's also very good for the environment. So that's what I will show you tonight. So the term integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, or to make it shorter, IMTA on the logo, as a matter of fact, are just a little over 11 years old. So happy birthday, IMTA. And that was created in the 26th of March 2004 at a workshop we had in St. John, New Brunswick. At that time, I was talking about integrated aquaculture, and Jack Taylor from Fisheries and Ocean Canada was talking about multi-trophic aquaculture. So we combined the two, and we came with IMTA, integrated multi-trophic aquaculture. So let me explain you what it is. But first, I should say it's a very old practice. It didn't start in 2004. As a matter of fact, if you go to Chinese literature, you can go already in minus 2200, 2100 before Christ, and you have a very interesting treatise, the Yu Bin, that is already talking about the integration of fish and aquatic plants. So it's in freshwater, not in seawater. So fish, aquatic plant, and vegetable production in China. So as a matter of fact, it's nothing new, but we are doing it more scientifically and controlling more things. That's what we are doing. So really what we are doing is developing IMTA a la Canadian sauce, okay? And also it could be also in the Maine sauce, it could be adaptable to here. So here, to give you an idea, it's one of the IMTA sites we have in the Bay of Fundy. So you call it the Gulf of Maine, but we like to call it the Bay of Fundy. But it's pretty much the same thing. Here we have salmon cages. Okay, maybe I should do it here. We have salmon cages, mussel cages, and seaweed raft. And another example, there is one person doing it also in British Columbia, so in the Pacific Oceans, with some fish, some shellfish, and seaweed. So the same idea, but different cages because we are in British Columbia versus what we have here on the East Coast. So how does it work, integrated multi-trophic aquaculture? At the beginning, we thought it was made of 3 components. So we have the fish, so that's what we call fed aquaculture, because you give them food. So and as you give food, you also create a nutrient zone. So what do we do with these different nutrients? We have different types of nutrients. The small organic particles, they don't go very far. So as a matter of fact, your suspension extractive aquaculture with going after the organic molecule, that's, for example, shellfish, mussels, oysters, scallops, that you put in lines that are very close to the salmon. And then you have another type of nutrients. That's what we call the dissolved inorganic nutrient, dissolved nitrogen, dissolved phosphorus, that travel a little more further downstream. So that's why you put your seaweed, and we work with scallops. So you put your seaweeds a little more downstream from the cages. So we also realize that we have other type of particule. We have the large particulate organic matter. So it's molecules that are too big to be absorbed by the mussels. So we have, and they go to the bottom much faster because they are bigger, they are denser, and they go to the bottom. We also have the mussels. The mussels, they produce feces and pseudofeces, and we have also to consider that. They go to the bottom too. So we realize we should have more than 3 components, as we thought at the beginning. We should have a 4th one. That's what we call deposit extractive aquaculture, with some invertebrates such as sea urchins, sea cucumbers, sea worms, and why not also lobsters. Okay, so we thought about that, and then the last 2 years, we think also something we have completely looked over is what the microbes, what the bacteria are doing. So here we have what we call the mineralizing aquaculture component. As a matter of fact, not too many people know what happened with microbes, with bacteria in the sea. They are important, but to quantify, to measure their activity is not easy. But they have also, and then when we talk about bacteria, people say, oh, but they are good bacteria, okay? They are not always the nasty bacteria. So we have to take advantage of the good bacteria. What is important also is so far we have gone down a cascade, okay? So if you want, it's just like here, that's not in my backyard, that's somebody else's backyard. We have a nice cascade, okay? That's what we have been doing. The small particles, the big particles, and all these things. But as a matter of fact, if you want this cascade to go on and go on and go on, as a matter of fact, what is behind you don't see, but it's a lot of engineering and pumps and pipes and all these things. So as a matter of fact, the same should apply to IMTA. Some serious bioengineering is needed if we want the things to go on. We cannot have just a cascade. We have to send the things back. So that's what we have to be careful. We need a receptor because the purpose is to degrade everything down to inorganic. But this inorganic has to be sent to the system so that it works. So what do? Who will be invited at the table to absorb this inorganic cake of nutrients? So we can have what I call the nuisance opportunistic algae, and that can be, for example, the green tide. Here is an example of serious green tide in Qingdao in China. We can also have blooms of toxic blooms. So we have red tides, green tides, brown tides, and we start to talk more and more about that around here. So that's not very interesting algae. For me, what is more interesting is that the commercially opportune algae, and that's what we are doing in the Bay of Fundy, is growing kelp. At the present time, we are also starting to grow other seaweeds, but these, we can do something with it. Compared to the nuisance one, nobody is doing anything with it. So one thing that is important, and I always say that to the aquaculture sector, the aquaculture industry, which is in the Western world, is mostly an animal aquaculture. I say you cannot escape the photosynthetic world. You need the algae, you need the plant, you need the seaweeds to complete the cycle, okay? And adding more animals is not the solution. You have to have different organisms doing different things at different levels, okay? So really what we have to do now is to work on these things. The nutrients have to go back so that we can close the cycles, okay? And that is very important. So that's, if you want, the general diagram of what integrated multi-trophic aquaculture is about. If integrated multi-trophic aquaculture is a mouthful, you can say IMTA, it's shorter. And if it is still too complicated to remember, you can sing it. So you remember YMCA. You can do the same thing with IMTA, and that's what we are doing, okay? So we even have karaoke nights, and we have students, graduate students doing IMTA here at the workshop we had in December in Chile. So that's the same thing. And now you will remember the crazy Frenchman that was singing IMTA. That's what it is about. So what is IMTA? It's based on a very simple principle. The solution to nutrification is not dilution. In the Gulf of Maine and in the Bay of Fundy, we always say, oh, tremendous tide, the highest tide in the world at the end of the Bay of Fundy, and everything. So why to worry, okay? But big tides, what does that mean? 6 hours one way, 6 hours the other way. So things are not moving that much, okay? They are just doing that, okay? Calculation done by people from Fisheries and Oceans Canada in St. Andrews are saying that to exchange the whole water of the Bay of Fundy and the Gulf of Maine, it takes 72 days. So it's 2 months and a half, okay? So there is not as much exchange as what we're seeing with tides, okay? It's just back and forth. So in 72 days, there is a lot of time for nutrients to be absorbed, but they have to be absorbed the right way. So really, it's not dilution. The solution, it's extraction. So you have to extract these nutrients, and you have to convert them into a biomass that is interesting. So that's recycling, and it's diversification. Okay, that's what I said always to the salmon aquaculture industry. Don't put all your salmon eggs in the same basket. Okay, that's what we are talking here with diversification. Okay, so how does it work? The IMTA concept for me is extremely flexible. I like to say IMTA is the central overarching, the umbrella. Okay, and then we have many variations. Okay, so it's a little like in music. Not the music of Frédéric Chopin this time, but the music of Johann Sebastian Bach. He was very well known for theme and variations, okay? So the central theme is IMTA, and then we have many variations. So you know, what he was doing is a general theme, ta-da, 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 and then you make variation, ta-da, 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 and then you do another one. So you do many variations on the same theme, and you adapt it to the region where you are. That's what IMTA is about. So you can do it in open water or also in land-based. That's what also we are working on at the present time. Marine or freshwater environment, and temperate like where we are, but also you can do it in tropical climates. What is really important is to choose the appropriate organism based on the trophic level, on their function in the ecosystem, and also if you want to convince the aquaculture industry to move in that direction, they also have to have economic value, okay, or the industry will not be interested. But what is very important is what do they do in the ecosystem, not their interesting Latin names. And also what is important is when we say integration, it should be understood as cultivation in proximity, but not an absolute distance, okay? We had problem with that. As a matter of fact, in Canada, it was, you are not allowed to do IMTA closer to 125 meters. And I say, where does that come from, these 125 meters? And I was always going to meeting, and I said, no, I recalculate, it's 152.8 meters, or I don't know how many feet it makes. But I was saying, no magic numbers, that's not what is important. What is important is how it works in the ecosystem. So what is important is what is called bay management, okay? How water circulates is also how nutrients circulate. So that's what is important. So also one thing that should be clear is when we created IMTA in 2004, we never thought that it was limited to salmon, kelps, and blue mussels, and a few other invertebrates in temperate waters and within a few hundred meters. The concept is much broader than that. So we can have also going in China to systems that are as big as the Yellow Sea. Okay, so it's quite interesting. So it means that we have many variations of IMTA, and as you have noticed, we like acronyms. So I will give you a few more here. Integrated agriculture and aquaculture, you can mix them. That's IAA. We have integrated fish with aquaculture. For me, is also a type of IMTA. We, in the tropics, you can have, for example, shrimp aquaculture with mangroves, so silviculture. We can have growing a lot of green algae, so green water. Biofloc aquaculture. Temporal aquaculture is when you separate in time. Sequential in aquaculture, that's when you separate, you fractionate your aquaculture. We can have sustainable ecological aquaculture because that make seas. We can have also, very important, we are working on that now, freshwater IMTA, or sometimes it's called aquaponics. That's a type of IMTA. We have also some people that develop aquaculture in cities, peri-urban aquaculture. And then also you can combine food and renewable energy park like wind farms and all these things. That will be also very interesting. So here are all these acronyms, but I will show you a few pictures of it. Agriculture, aquaculture. Here we are in Vietnam. So we are mixing the cultivation of rice with cultivation of fish. Okay? That's a type of IMTA. We are here in India. It's what is called green water aquaculture. That's also IMTA. Here we are in Israel. That's what is called biofloc aquaculture. And freshwater IMTA or aquaponics, that was developed extensively at the University of Virgin Islands by Dr. Rakoczy, and then other people try to do it. And what we are doing is doing it with salmon aquaculture, because the salmon hatcheries, which are in fresh water, okay, so we don't use seaweed this time, but we use plants and lettuce and ornamental plants and all these things. And it's very important because everybody talk about salmon at sea, but salmon at sea is year 2 and 3. Year 1 is on land-based close containment aquaculture system, which are called hatcheries. And there, because we are in fresh water, it's not a nitrogen issue, but it's a phosphorus issue, and we can adopt exactly the same principle. So for the last 2 years, we have been starting to do freshwater IMTA, and it's working very well. Now, that was what we do, but if you go in China, really that open your eyes, because their system of IMTA are at a completely different scales than what we are doing, okay? So that's Google Earth, okay? So that's view from satellite, and all that, okay? And here are channels, okay? But all that's seaweed aquaculture, okay? 10 miles, okay? And you go there, you say, where is the end of your site, okay? And it goes on, and it goes on, and it goes on. And that's how it looks from the surface when you are on a boat, okay? And the big question for me was, I have been 4 times there. The big question for me was, where are the fish cage? We see a lot of seaweeds, a lot of shellfish in between the rope of seaweeds, but I don't see the fish cages. So here, it's a little close-up. Okay, all these black spots, that's seaweed aquaculture, okay? So the fish, they are here, and they are here. So there's not too many fish here. So how does the system work? It works completely differently, okay? And it took some time to understand what was going on. So we go with our Chinese colleagues, and they are always very nice to us. So as you go through the sites that never end, of course, they bring all kind of food, so you have all kind of shellfish as we go along, and also as we go along, the best beer in China, Qingdao beer, is also coming out. So we have a wonderful time, but I was thinking, how this thing is working, okay? Because our system is working with fish effluent, but there is no fish there. So if you do the calculation, as a matter of fact, all these invertebrates, they produce around 300 tons of nitrogen per year, okay? Now, if you look at the seaweeds, on its huge cultivation, it's 200,000 tons fresh weight of kelps that are grown each year. So if you do the calculation at 0.3% nitrogen or 0.5% nitrogen, to grow the seaweeds, you need between 600 and 1,000 tons. And I told you in the previous things, the shellfish only produce 300. So what is really missing is between 300, 3 plus 3 equals 6, or 7 plus 3 equals 1,000. So there are some nutrients missing, and your seaweeds are growing very well. So the nutrients are coming from somewhere else, and that's how we have to understand the Chinese system. As a matter of fact, there is a lot of agricultural runoff, okay? And there is also a lot of aquaculture that is land-based aquaculture, here and here and here, everywhere. And here are your seaweeds, okay? So as a matter of fact, if you want to understand this system, it's not only what is happening at seas. It's the whole water catchment, the water basement that has to be considered, and then you understand that there is a lot of nutrients. So really, what type of IMTA variation are we talking about in the Western world and in the Asian world? In the Western world, we have what I call, that's another acronym, we have FISH IMTA. We start with fish, and we try to introduce invertebrates and seaweeds. But initially, it's based on fish. Compared to a large-scale system in Asia that are not fish, but in reverse. They are SIF. We start with seaweeds, and we try to add some invertebrate, and we try to add some fish. So it's a very different approach in the system on a very different scale. So really, are we talking about apple and oranges? Or should we work together? We have a lot to learn from the Chinese, and they have a lot to learn from us, okay? So should we work together towards a more integrated solution, okay? That's what is happening. So I went last year, I went twice to Korea. And for me, it was very interesting. It's not as dense as what you see in China. It's a little less dense, and it's very interesting. But I was told in Korea, in South Korea, I was told, oh, there is only one place that do IMTA, and that's this National Fisheries Research and Development Institute. And they told me, yeah, you can see it. Here are your fish. Here are 3 lines of kelp. And here are 2 lines of shellfish. So that's the only place that do IMTA. And I said, no, I disagree with you, because you took me to other places, and I can look at it from Google Earth. What are all these things? What are that and that? That seaweed, what is that? Well, that is albalone. They do a lot of albalone cultivation. So here we are. What they have, it's kelp and albalone co-culture, so they get their seaweeds, they feed them to the albalone. So here you are. You have seaweeds, albalone, seaweeds, everything. So I say that's IMTA. It's maybe not by design, it's maybe accidental or adventitious IMTA, but that's IMTA. So they don't call it IMTA, but that's really a type of IMTA. It's nicely done. It's not as intensive as in China, and it's very interesting. So what do we want? One thing is I have been working on IMTA since 2000, 2001, so 14 years. And really what I come to realize is that science and society need time to think and need time to evolve. So it means that IMTA will not happen overnight. Everybody is in a hurry and would like to have it in place. And I would say it will not happen overnight, especially in the Western world, because we have to change the mind of a lot of people. And we have to change the mind of a lot of regulators. And that's not an easy task. So we have to really work, and it will take some time. So really what we have been doing is 2 types, East Coast, West Coast of Canada, but for me there is no ultimate IMTA system to feed the world. Really what we have to look is each time what are the climatic, environmental, biological, physical, chemical, economic, historical, societal, political, and governance conditions. The regulation in Canada are different from the regulation in the US. We have to consider that because we will have different solutions. Okay? And then what is important is the best suited IMTA system where you are. So I don't have any preconceived IMTA design. We have to adapt it each time to the region where you are. So here in New Brunswick, so up the Gulf of Maine, just after that, we are in St. George, so St. Andrews, St. George. And here is a typical salmon site to which we add mussel raft and also seaweed raft. So we always start with an existing salmon site and we gradually modify it. So I will not talk too much about salmon because that's a typical salmon site So the salmon cages, the salmon, the automatic feeding, and everything. So conventional salmon. But I will show you the other components. So the seaweed component, so here are the rope of kelp, and here are one of the rope of kelp, so it starts to be quite heavy. One thing I would like to talk is, because when you talk about seaweeds, generally people say, what is that? Okay, so I don't know exactly what you know about seaweeds, but I will do a little seaweed 101, okay? So you will be surprised, the Mariculture, so that's aquaculture at sea. In 2012, that was 48.5 million tons. Everybody talk about finfish, everybody talk here about salmon, but finfish aquaculture is around 9–10% of worldwide aquaculture. What you will be very surprised, what is the most produced at the present time, 49%, that's seaweeds. And then comes the mollusk, 30%. So your fish are only 9 to 11, let's say 10%. But here, because we see so much salmon aquaculture, we equate aquaculture to salmon aquaculture. But in many other places in the world, that's not the situation. Okay? So how much of that is known in the Western world? Not too much, because 96% of the seaweeds are produced in 6 Asian countries, mostly in China, then Indonesia, the Philippines, the Republic of Korea or South Korea, Japan, and Malaysia. So it's an Asian story, and that's why we don't know much about it here. So seaweed aquaculture production, 96% of the seaweeds are aquaculture. So there is only 4% of wild harvest. We have wild harvest of rockweed in Maine and in the Atlantic provinces of Canada, but it's part of this 4%. So it's a very small proportion, okay? 96% is cultivated. As a matter of fact, a lot of people say, oh yes, very soon, or maybe this year, we will reach the 50-50, the 50% of farm and the 50% of wild harvest, okay? That's for fish. With seaweeds, the 50-50 threshold was reached in 1971, okay? And now we have 96% is coming from aquaculture, okay? Now, production, very significant, 23.8 million tons, again, produced mostly in Asia. The value is not negligible, 6.4 billion, and you see I put US dollars, so you don't have to do conversions. And again, 99% generated in Asia. Average annual growth, 7.7%, not too many companies have that. But what is interesting, not so many species cultivated. 220 species cultivated. Basically, we can say worldwide we have around 10,000 to 11,000 species of seaweed, but not so much are cultivated. And as a matter of fact, 6 genera provide most of the production and the value. Very much like what we do with animal agriculture, okay? We have a lot of species, but as a matter of fact, we don't eat too many things. We eat cows, chicken, turkey, lamb, and that's pretty much it. Pigs, sorry, pigs, yes. So 5 species. Then there was also a few years ago, Paul Greenberg published 4 fish, okay? We are not doing so many, we are not eating so many fish, okay? So we have a lot available, but there is not so many type of organisms that are amenable to agriculture or aquaculture. So what are there? These 6 genera, Saccharina, that was called Laminaria, but some molecular biologists from University of New Brunswick changed the name in 2006. So that was called, that's a good old kelp, okay? But now it's called Saccharina. Undaria, that's another one. Porphyra, that's nori. That's what you use, in sushi, the purple things. Very interesting. You say, what is that picture? That's the nori net. So the noris are here, but the way they harvest that in Japan is like a reverse lawnmower, okay? Instead of cutting your grass like that, imagine you have a lawnmower like that. So your net of seaweeds go above your boat, and you are cutting you are mowing the net like that. Okay, that's what it is. So it go under and go under and go under. We have here a grassy area. We are in China. Here we are in the Philippines, Capophycus, and in India, Sargassum. So that's the 6 type of seaweeds that are mostly 99% of the industry. So what do we do in the Bay of Fundy? We grow Saccharina latissima, which was called Laminaria saccharinea, and we grow Alaria esculenta, so equivalent, if you want, to what is called kombu or wakame in Japan. But for us, we are only interested in cultivating local species. I am not interested in introducing non-native species to the Bay of Fundy or the Gulf of Maine. Okay, so I will always work with that. We are also working with the red at the present time, but it's native to the Bay of Fundy. So how does it work? The kelp, at the time of the year, they get this dark spot, okay? And in that, there is thousands, if it is not millions, of spores. So we don't need too many plants. We cut these things, we put them in the water, they release their little spores. We add lines on PVC pipes. So that's the beginning. So the pipes, the twines are white. And then the spore settles. Some the tiny filaments that the male, the big filaments that the female. You know what happened when you have male and females. They got some ideas, and we got the next generations, okay? So we are back to the little kelp, okay? Tiny, tiny little things under the microscope, and that's what happened here. What was white become fuzzy brown, and we are happy. When it becomes fuzzy brown, it's not contamination, it's growing. So we want that. When they are roughly 0.5 millimeters, or tiny, tiny little things, we move them to the site. Now it's mechanized and everything. And so that's in November, we have tiny little things. And in May, June, they will be 3 meters, so let's say 9 feet long. Okay, so the growth of kelp is mostly a winter-spring story. Okay, it's not a summer story. It's a cold water species. Okay, so that's what we do. So we, over the years, we have spent a lot of time about designing the right raft. You want rafts that are sturdy enough, but flexible enough, because we have huge tides, and nature doesn't like square angles. And you understand that very rapidly after one season. Okay, so you want something flexible. Then you have this line. Each line is roughly 3/4 of a ton. Okay, so you have wonderful, hardworking graduate students, but after 3 ropes, they say, it's enough. We have to mechanize these things. So here comes the mechanization, and you see this guy is supporting the right kitting. Then harvesting has to be mechanized. And then the big thing also is drying. It's easy to dry a few kilos of seaweeds. Drying a few tons of seaweeds is much more complicated. So we spend a lot of time understanding the drying. So that's for the seaweed. Let's talk about the mussels. The mussels, that's our first raft, and now that's where we are at. So we can produce here 60 tons of mussels per raft. Also, what is very interesting, mussels, when we buy them in the stores, we want them to be close, okay? Because if they gap, that's generally not a very good sign. But underwater, people don't see too many pictures of mussels underwater. But what they are is siphon in and siphon out. And as a matter of fact, each mussel is capable of filtering 4 to 6 liters per hour. So it's tremendous. I don't know how many gallons, maybe 2 gallons or whatever, 2 gallons per hour. So these things are tremendous filtering machines, okay? And that's why they interest us, because they can recover, but the small particles, they will not touch the big particles, okay? The small particles they can recover. Then for the big particles, we are developing systems that are at the bottom. So we are developing sea urchins, scallops, and sea cucumbers, aquaculture. And we are playing with different type of containment system. These sea cucumbers are master Houdini escapers. They can go through unbelievable mesh and all these things. So it's not easy to keep them together. So what also is very important is when we do IMTA, we have to talk about what is called ecosystem services, because these extractive components of IMTA play a role in the ecosystem. They extract these things. So as a matter of fact, when people talk about ecosystem services, it's what nature, or aquaculture in our case, is doing free of charge to help us, okay? So if I take the example of, so yes, one thing I should say is ecosystem services, at the present time, a lot of people get excited about carbon tax, carbon credits. I prefer to talk about carbon credits than carbon tax, okay? But for me, in the marine environment, we should talk about nutrient trading credits. The issue is much more nitrogen and phosphorus than carbon. So I hope that in the big conferences soon they will not only talk about carbon. So if I take the example of the seaweed industry, so I told you 23.8 million tons, a value of 6.4 billion. If I look at the average composition, okay, of nitrogen, phosphorus, and carbon, and that's the price it costs me when I have wastewater treatment facilities. That's one taken from taking off from Toronto airport, so it's just outside of Toronto. When I want to remove 1 kilo of nitrogen, it costs me between 10 and 30. For phosphorus, it's 4, and for carbon, it's $30 per ton. Okay? So if I do the calculation, what do the seaweed do free of charge for us, the ecosystem services? Between $892 million US to $2.5 billion of removing nutrients free of charge, okay? But they are doing something in the ecosystem, and we should reward them or reward the people that grow them. Or if you want, as a matter of fact, it's 40% of their commercial value. At the present time, we sell the biomass of seaweed. We sell the biomass of shellfish. We should also input in the spreadsheet the value of the ecosystem services they render to us. So we should do also the same thing with phosphorus. That was the value for nitrogen, okay? We should do the same thing with phosphorus. And what is important, you know, the P peak, people talk about petroleum peak. The next P peak, it's a phosphorus peak. The next element we will be short will be phosphorus. Carbon trading credit, we should do the same thing. What is very interesting is, if you look at the value, it's between $25 and $30 a ton. With nitrogen, it's between $3 and $38 per kilo. So ton, kilos, there is a factor 1,000. You can make more money with nutrient trading credits than with carbon trading credits. Nobody is talking about that. And we should do the same thing with shellfish. So really, at the present time, there is a renewed interest in the mariculture of seaweed for their cultivation, their ecosystem services, and also novel use. So seaweed accumulate phosphorus, and again, I mentioned the next P peak is the phosphorus peak. Seaweeds can be cultivated without fertilizer. I don't have to fertilize. I don't have to add agrochemicals to my field. Seaweed do not need to be irrigated. They are in water. I don't need to pump the water on all these things. Seaweed cultivation doesn't need more arable soil, land transformation. And also seaweed can be used as habitat restoration. They do that, for example, in Japan quite a lot. Now also something very important in aquaculture, seaweeds are the only component that provide oxygen. The other fish, shellfish, consume oxygen. So we need things that do things in reverse. Now also seaweeds sequester carbon. So as a matter of fact, they play a role in global warming and climate change. We should talk about that. Now also more and more people talk about ocean acidification. That's the only chemical formula I give you tonight, okay? CO2 plus water plus carbonate give you bicarbonate. What the shellfish and the corals need to calcify, to make their shells, is carbonate. When we add carbon dioxide, CO2, we push the equilibrium towards bicarbonate, and the shellfish and the corals cannot use that form of carbon. So they cannot calcify, and we have seen problems more on the west coast than on the east coast of ocean acidification. What is very interesting is, as a matter of fact, if seaweeds trap this CO2, so if we have this element disappearing, the equilibrium should reverse, and we should go back to carbonate. So as a matter of fact, and you can do it, you can change the pH of water with seaweeds, okay? And nobody pay attention to that. But they also have their role in ocean acidification. Now, also, as we talk about climate change, I think IMTA is also a very good strategy. Again, I don't put all my salmon eggs in the same basket. I have salmon, I have shellfish, I have seaweeds. I diversify my portfolio. If there is a climate change, cooling or warming, I will be able to play with different species. And